technology works for me better than it's worked for other people today. Let's not jinx it. I apologise for the extra spine I've got down the front as well, but the shape of my body doesn't go with wearing jerseys and it pushes everything out. Right, so, yeah, that worked. When Paul spoke to me about coming along to talk to this, we tried to work out what we could talk about, and apart from everybody wanting to know how to blame networks for when something goes wrong, which always happens in IT, the only other thing we felt everybody really had strong feelings on was change management. Now, those strong feelings aren't always positive strong feelings, but quite often everybody has a strong thought about it, either whether it's something that you've got to put up with or whether it's something that you can bypass, and how do you do that? Whether it's something that you just want to try and ignore because it's too difficult, the process is too hard. But there are people out there, and I'm hoping that some of them in here as well, who accept change management, understand why you do it, and are champions for it within the organisation. So is anybody here involved in the change management side of things? Oh, blimey, that's good. You're going to challenge me now, aren't you? So why do we do change management? In IT, as in the real world, we manage change to reduce risk and to make sure that things work in a more controlled manner. I don't think that's a too strong a statement to say. It's not about anything difficult, it's just about reducing the risk so that when we're doing things, we don't break it too hard or too much. It's not about increasing paperwork. It's not about slowing things down, although it may do that, but that's not what it's all about. It's making sure that when we make a change to the production environment or when we put something new in there, we've thought it through and we can demonstrate that we've thought it through. Excuse my voice. Started losing it yesterday. And it's also about recording any changes that we're doing so that if or when something does go wrong, and I think looking at people here, we've all worked in IT long enough to know that stuff does go wrong, whether you want it to or not, that we can demonstrate that we've considered how we were going to do it, what we were going to do if it went wrong, and how we were going to test that it was worked when we actually did the change. So there's an element of cover your backside, but it's recording that so that we can go back and check and see if something that we did was the cause of something that's gone wrong. I don't think there is, or I've certainly never come across anybody in IT that deliberately wants to just roll their sleeves up and jump into something without considering it first. I don't think there's anybody out there who honestly wants to do a bad job. I don't think there's anybody out there who couldn't care less whether something they do has an impact or negative impact or not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've just lived in a nice little bubble and only dealt with nice people in IT. But does anybody here have evidence of people in IT who deliberately go out of their way to do the wrong thing? You don't have to name names. Unless they're here, in which case, let's all point and... So in general, everybody wants to do the right thing. They want to show they've thought through how they're going to do it. And change management just formalises that, because in people's heads, it's already there. So what do we do with change management? Well, ITIL, which I'm guessing is probably the framework that most of you base your daily lives on, if not your work life, only your work life, then probably your home life as well, because you can't go through without at least 5 manuals telling you every step of your life. And ITIL can make things look very difficult. They can make it look very bureaucratic because people open the books or they do the foundation exam or they do one of the other exams and they go, this is what it must be, forgetting that ITIL is just a framework and you can pick and choose the bits that you want to make it work for you. So if you've got somebody out there who's saying, no, this is how it must be because the books say so, give them a smack around the back of the head and make them think again. So the first thing that you have to do with any change is record it. Now, again, that's not to slow things down or to make life difficult for somebody in the infrastructure team, but it's just to make sure that we've gathered some key information for any change that we're doing. So we need to know who's asked for it. Somebody must have done, because if nobody's asked for it, then why the hell are you doing it? It could just be you asking for it because you've identified that something needs to change, but somebody somewhere has asked for this change to happen. What is it that's being done? Now, again, you know what it is you're going to be doing, but when you're recording that, try and put it into something that's meaningful. You know, put it into, I was going to say English, but I live in Auckland, so that's not always the first language. But put it into plain language that everybody in the wider business can understand. Because if you've got your forward schedule of change being published for the wider business, people like to understand what it is being done. Rather than saying, increase RAM on server XYZ YYY 123, say, improve performance in the SharePoint server, or whatever it might be. So people understand that. Why are you doing it? Again, if there's no reason, as a change manager, you should be asking, well, what are we doing it for? So just why? Who's doing it? Is it you or is it somebody else in the organisation? Now that might sound silly, but does the person who's going to be doing it know they're going to be doing it? Because I have worked places where Bob in the server team has been put down as the person implementing a change at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, but he knew nothing about it until he got a call from somebody at 2:30 saying, yep, you're good to go in half an hour. And he was in the middle of a rugby game. So it's making sure that you've thought through who's going to be doing it and making sure they know about it. When are you doing it? Another daft question to ask, but I've seen a lot of places where people say, oh yeah, I'll do that, but not actually considering when they're going to do it, whether the wider business is happy with it being done then, or even saying I'm going to do it at 3 o'clock on Saturday, but then not doing it until 5 o'clock on Sunday because they were busy. And that doesn't help anybody either, because your wider business relies on you telling them when something may not be available. So you've got to get that right, and that has to be set in stone, really. There's a lot of places where techies seem to think that they can just pick and choose when they do a change, and that's not really useful to anybody. And it makes your lives harder if you're involved in the change process. In line with that, is there going to be any downtime? Because if there's no downtime, then the wider business probably couldn't care less that you're doing something. But if there is going to be downtime, you need to record that. So change could be a day long if there's several things that need doing, but there may only be a half-hour outage on a particular service. And that's what your customers or your wider business care about. So it's recording that. Communication. Now, as a techie, you could say, I don't care. That's up to the change manager or the service delivery manager or somebody to do all that. But if as the techie you know what's going to be affected and roughly who's going to use it, at least write that down for the service delivery manager or change manager so that they can make their comms easier. They don't have to think through or try and go through a whole service catalogue or configuration management database to understand who's going to be affected. If the techie knows, what's the harm in telling you? How are you going to test that the change? How are you going to do the change? So again, 99% of techies know what they're going to do when they're going to do it. So asking them to write down, it doesn't have to be War and Peace, just bullet points. I'll download this, I'll implement that, done. Maybe I have to restart the server afterwards. And then how are they going to test that it's worked? They'll know that as well, because pretty much every techie I've met knows that if they're going to do something, they know how they're going to test that it's worked, because they don't want to get a smack around the back of the head or woken up in the middle of the night if something hasn't worked. But if it hasn't worked, get them to record how they're going to back it out again as well, because they will know that. Every techie I've met knows how they're going to do something, how they're going to make sure it's worked, and if it hasn't worked, how they're going to put it back to a working state so that they can then go home and get drunk. And then just understanding what the risk is of doing it, but also of not doing it. Because sometimes the risk of doing something may be minimal, but the risk of not doing it could be quite high. And that's useful for the change management people to understand. If they're considering saying, no, we don't want this to go ahead, but they can see that the risk of not doing it is greater than something else, then that's worth noting. And then the impact, which everybody always writes low, because they know the impact is low. So you might have to work with them on that if you're involved in change management, just to get them to understand what the impact really is. But it's always low, and the risk is low as well. So it's not difficult to record a change. There's, 8 or 9 different things, most of which people already know because they've got it in their heads, and all you're asking them to do is to just write it down, which maybe takes them 10 minutes longer than normal. But it's not a huge overhead. Reviewing the change. This is a really difficult step. If you're a techie looking to do a change, 9 times out of 10, you're going to sit down with somebody who works with you to say, does this look right? Have I missed anything? Or you just talk it through over a coffee. So by getting the review done formally, you're just proving to other people that you've already done that anyway. So just passing the change on or giving the task to them or whatever it might be to say, can you just check I've not missed anything out? That's it. There's no harm in asking for somebody else to look at your work. There's no shame in them going, you've forgotten something. And say, 9 times out of 10, people are doing that anyway. And if there isn't a techie peer review that needs to happen, just getting the change coordinator to give it the once-over to say, have I missed anything out? So that it's not going to get rejected or thrown back at you later on in the process. Because if you can get other people to have a look through it before you pass it on to the next stage, you're going to save time for you, everybody else, and you're not going to look stupid. So just getting a review done. Now, assess and evaluate, again, a really difficult one. This is where it may be part of the last process, the review, but all you're asking to happen here is the change coordinator or change manager or whoever's doing that step to give it the once-over and make sure that it's all okay. You're asking them to make sure that, well, you're not formally asking them, but they will be making sure that it's not going to have an impact on any other changes that maybe have been raised. So is it going to happen at the same time with the same person on the same server or the same area of the network or the same application? Because you don't want to be doing that, because how do you know which change caused the issue that happened on the Monday morning? Making sure there's no dependency on people. If 2 or 3 changes have all got Bob doing the change at the same time, well, unless Bob's a superhero, he's not going to be able to do that. He might think he can because he can say, oh yeah, I'll just do them one after the other, but that's not doing them all at the same time. So it's just making sure there's no dependencies or clashes. And if there are any uncertainties, if you're the change coordinator or change manager, don't just reject it, because you'll lose friends quicker than anything. Go and have a chat with the person who's raised the change and say to them, we need to work on this, or can we change that, or whatever it might be. So just getting some more information or working with them, again, it breaks down a whole load of barriers and it stops people hating you with a fire that burns within. If there's any POMs here or people who lived in the UK in the 80s, that's Kevin Turvey, and I couldn't resist that. So Authorized. Now this, assuming that everything's gone well so far and you've got through the peer review, you've had the assess and evaluate done and everybody's hunky-dory and tickety-boo with it, this should be a foregone conclusion. It's just a rubber stamp from here on. But whatever you do here, it's got to fit your organisation. I can't tell you how it's got to be, because I've worked in some places where You go through a CAB process where there's half a dozen or more people all sit around a table twice a week and go through every single change. And that works for them. I've worked other places where the person doing the change coordinator role has been given authority to review and assess and approve 95% of all the changes. Other places where pretty much everything is a pre-approved change, as long as it's gone through the CAB process once or twice. It's got to fit what you want it to be. But the easier you can make it, the better it's going to be for the people who are raising the changes, for the people who are approving the changes, and for the CAB people as well, because if they haven't got to be involved, it's a lot smoother. If you're not currently doing change management, then I'd probably suggest you start off overly cautiously and get your CAB to review every single change so that there's confidence being built up that everybody knows what they're doing and why they're doing it. But if you're already doing it, then just try and streamline as much as you can. The more you can remove from groups of people sitting around a table, the better. It's a lot quicker. Now, if you do go to CAB, that's not a place for every change to be reviewed in technical detail and everything to be gone through to the nth degree. People should be reviewing the changes beforehand, asking any questions beforehand, getting all their questions answered, their comfort factor raised, so that when it comes to CAB, the change coordinator or manager, and I worked somewhere recently where everybody has to go along to CAB, but the changes are brought up on the screen and the change coordinator just goes, right, change number 1, 2, 3, 4, any issues? Looks round, no, on to the next. And they can get through a dozen more changes within 5 minutes with more than half a dozen people sat around a table because everybody has reviewed them beforehand, had all their questions answered, and it's just a formal gathering to say, yep, go ahead. Maybe once or twice somebody in the business might put their hand up and go, we're doing something that weekend that affects that application, could you do it the following weekend? But 9 times out of 10, it's just gone, and it's move on to the next. This step also handles the communication. So making sure that you know who's got to be communicated to and getting that communication out. That communication may just be telling the implementer, yep, go for it, at the date and time that you said you were going to do it, not earlier or later. Or communicating out to the wider business to tell them, this is what we're going to be doing next week, this is what the impact's going to be, and as big or as small as you need it to be, you know your business better than anybody else. Or at least I presume you do. And then we get to the sexy stuff, the implement. It's what we all live for in IT. So implement is, as I say, getting on and doing what you want to do when you said you were going to do it. But it could also be coordinating. Maybe you've got half a dozen people that need to be involved in the change. So you get everybody lined up. You make sure they know what they're doing when they're doing it. Maybe you've got third parties who need to be involved in the change or who are doing the change, making sure that they're lined up and they know what they're doing and that they're going to do it at the right time, not just when it suits them. So again, it's not difficult. It's what we do day by day, but it's a formal step within change management. And then the review and close. So if everything's gone tickety-boo, you don't need to bother with this, unless maybe somebody said, I want to make this change, pre-approved change in future. So, as a change coordinator, you might sit down and just make sure it worked in the way they said it was going to work, so that you can then say, right, in future, that's a pre-approved change, we don't need to know, just record it and get on with it. But maybe something's gone wrong. Now, it could be it took longer than expected, or something just didn't work, or maybe the people that said they were going to do it weren't available. It could be a multitude of different things. But this isn't a witch hunt, and it doesn't need to be a 4-hour meeting with the world and his mother going through every single thing. It could just be the change coordinator sitting down with the implementer to say, okay, what went wrong? What do we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen again? Do we need to look at better training? Do we just need to understand that it's actually going to take 2 hours rather than the half hour that you thought it was going to take? Do we need to make sure that something is prepared better beforehand? As I say, it should be a lessons learned, so it should be a productive, proactive session where you document the outcome so that people can learn from it in future. And you don't even have to name names. You could just say, this failed, this is what needs to happen in future so that we can get through it easier. Because the whole purpose of change management is to make sure we reduce risk, as I said earlier. So if we can do that and flow through the process, everybody loves it. So how do we go about doing pragmatic change management, not using the ITIL books? Well, quite easily, because as I said, ITIL is just a framework, so you just pick and choose the bits that you want to use. That's it, really. I'm sorry, I'm probably standing in your way. But it's just, what are we handling, communicating, having procedures, training and coaching people, working out who your cab's going to be, and then making sure you've got the right reviewer. So, what changes do you want to handle? Well, where do I start? If you're not already doing this, you might want to say, well, we only want changes for this system to go through change management, or we only want infrastructure changes to go through change management. It doesn't need to be a huge behemoth of a process. Start off small, get people used to following the process, understanding why they're doing it and how they're doing it, and then you can start expanding it out to other things. But getting people on board by picking on the right things or the high visibility systems just makes it easier for people to get their head around why they're doing it. If you start off with something that people go, but I know what I'm doing, I do this day in, day out, already you've lost them. So get those easy wins on the board. If you're already doing it, say, review what you're already putting through change management and see if you can add anything else into there. I've worked in some organisations where everything in IT went through change management, but the facilities team would quite often shut down parts of the building or work on areas of the building and take the roof out so that nobody could work in there, or shut the air conditioning down over weekends, including in the comms room, or dig up the drive where the fibre was running down. So getting them to go through change management as well. If you can manage that, then put that on your CV, because that's a great, and then leave. But that's a great skill, and you'll earn shed loads of money. But getting people like that outside of IT to adopt change management and understand where the value is to them as well, that's a huge benefit to the whole organisation, and that makes IT look good in the eyes of the wider organisation rather than just the people in the dungeon who affect their lives. And again, if you can, try and get as much of it pre-approved as possible so that you don't have to go through a long process every single time you want to do a change. Communicate. So tell people what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, that's not just in the wider business, but also within IT. You'll have some people who've worked in the same organisation for 15 years, never had to do anything different. They know what they're doing, don't like change, don't like doing anything different, never had to do it, it's always worked. So communicating to them why you need to do something. You've obviously got people like that in your organisation, haven't you? Explaining to them why you're doing it and how it's reducing risk. How, if they're really against it, use the cover your ass excuse. You writing down what you're going to do and how you're going to do it is just proving that you've thought it through. So if something does go wrong, nobody can blame you. A lot of people like that one and they'll use it. But keep the communication going. The more you can tell people and the more you can give people the opportunity to feed back to you about what they don't like or what they do like or what they want to change, the sooner they're going to come on board, especially if you can demonstrate you're listening to them, not just saying thank you very much, writing it down and ignoring them. But using that feedback, both constructive and negative, can help you win people over. But you can't do that without constant communication. It's organisational change management rather than just IT change management. Then you've got your process and procedures. How am I doing for time here? Cool. Now, a lot of people hate processes. A lot of people think that it's the devil's spawn. But all you're doing is writing down very simply what people are supposed to do. You've got your change management process. You draw it up in a nice, sexy flowchart with a few words behind it. It doesn't need to be a 14-ring binder library of every single thing that everybody has to think about. It's just guidance. If you were to say to somebody, right, we're all going to head over there, but gave them no direction about how to get there, you'd lose some people as they tramped off over the hills and paddocks, working out their own way of getting there. But if you can put some fences down and say to people, right, we're heading off down there, even if they start off going in the wrong direction, they're going to hit a fence and bounce back. And eventually you'll all end up at the same place. But over time, you can improve the processes. I mean, you should be improving your processes. Shane there is having to review his every 3 months to make sure that if they've changed the way they're working, they just reflect that in the process. It's not to say that the process has to tell them how to work, but it's if you change your way of working, change the process to reflect that, so that when those lovely auditors come along, you can say, yep, that's what we do and how we do it. And that's the same as bringing the fences closer together so that everybody does walk in the same direction and very roughly at the same speed. So it's not difficult, it's very easy, and I'm a consultant and I make money out of this. Training and coaching. So your training is telling people how they're going to do it on day one. Sitting them down, walking them through Service Desk Plus, assuming that we're going to be using that. And we're not using BMC Remedy. But giving them that training, workshops, showing them what they've got to do, giving them the opportunity to ask questions and sit there looking completely blank because they've never had to do it before. Yeah, that's what we do. But then the coaching is the ongoing stuff, helping them to understand how they can drive improvements, how they can feed back, how they can come up with better ways of doing things, how they can work with you as the change owner to make things better. Coaching is just ongoing, working with people. But if you stop at training, people will just lose interest and they'll go off and try and find ways of bypassing it because they'll think it's never going to improve. And it should improve. Oh, sorry, I've missed a page out. Right, your CAB, your Change Advisory Board. As I said before, these are not the people who approve changes. These are the people who provide feedback on changes and advise whether something is a good idea or not. It's the change manager who does the approvals, or the change coordinator. Your CAB may be made up of key people within IT and people of the wider business. Getting somebody from marketing or sales or production or whatever it is that you do to be involved in change management and have a seat on the CAB is a good idea. It gives them the opportunity to look at what's going on, and 9 times out of 10 they'll go, don't care. But if something does come up that's going to impact them that you haven't thought about in IT, having them say, are we sure that's a good idea? Or can we not do it that weekend or something? Or actually, we need to communicate this out to these people as well because they're going to be coming on board soon and this is going to have an impact on them in 3 weeks' time. So getting people from the wider business involved doesn't hurt in the slightest. In fact, it starts making friends of them. So they're more likely to promote change management. It's that opportunity for the final sanity check before the decision is made. So having people just sit there and nod glumly may seem like a waste of their time and your time, but it's not. They've had that opportunity to give you any feedback that you might need. Now, this is a personal point of view, but try not to have everybody sitting around the same table, because everybody comes in, they come in at dribs and drabs, nobody ever turns up on time. They'll sit around, they'll catch up with friends, they'll have a chat, then somebody will go out because somebody else hasn't come in and they'll go off and make a cup of tea, so then everybody's waiting for them to come back. If you've got to have everybody giving verbal approval, do it over the phone. Just set up a conference call. That can be a hell of a lot quicker because people find them painful. So they just want to get in there, get it done, and get out again. Stop me if I'm sounding too cynical. But if you can, if you've got a service management tool, and I'm guessing everybody here does, then try and use that to speed up the approval process or the review process or the advisory board process. Have it so that your CAB members get notified when a change has come through, so they can just look at the email and either say, yep, I'm happy with that, or no, I've got concerns. You can speed through, so if you do still have a formal CAB, you've already got everybody's approvals or comments, and then you can just have that formal, yep, these have all been approved, thank you very much, go about your business. So the more you can use technology, the better. But if you can't use the technology for some reason, then get away from the face-to-faces, because people will make it drag out. And then you've got your reviewer. This is your change coordinator or change manager. To me, this person is critical to change management. Without a good change manager or coordinator, the whole thing's going to fail. They are the champion for it. They'll work with the people who are raising changes to get it sorted out so that it can just flow through. They shouldn't be rejecting things. They should be working with people. They will be the gatekeeper between you as the requester and the CAB. They'll be the ones providing all the feedback. They'll be helping with the communication. They'll be instilling confidence in the CAB for the CAB to say, yep, we don't need to know about these, you can handle these in future. This person's, apart from maybe the guys that document everything they do, this is the hero of IT. Not the guy that doesn't document anything and likes to be the one who gets called out in the middle of the night to fix something. These people and the ones who document everything are the true heroes. They're the ones that make it work. Without them, it's all just going to fail. So who's the change coordinator or manager here? Yay! Heroes. No, you're not. So that process flow I talked about, it's really difficult. I don't know how well you can see that. But you work out if it's a standard change. If not, make it an emergency or a pre-approved. Get them to fill out the record, get a peer review done, submit it. Does it need to go to CAB? If yes, send it to CAB. If no, is it approved? I'm missing some no's out here because I did it quick and forgot. But it's really not difficult. A lot of us make it look difficult because we get charged by the hour, but it isn't difficult. You can knock one of those up in an hour by standing in front of a whiteboard with your colleagues, saying, how are we going to do this, writing it down, putting some words behind it so everybody understands what the pretty picture means, and then training people in it, and then constantly reviewing it. Because maybe you decide you don't want to do that bit. Maybe there's no reason for an emergency change in your organisation, or maybe you don't want pre-approved, or maybe you don't need a peer review. You can constantly improve it and make it work for you. But when you do, just change the process. What time am I meant to finish? get to the point where I have no time for questions. So why do we find it so difficult to do it? Well, it shouldn't be difficult because you can do all this, and sorry ManageEngine, but you can do all this on post-it notes or a whiteboard or a big pad. You don't need a sexy tool to do it. And you certainly don't need a multi-million-dollar tool that's going to take months to implement. This is where I come back to you now. It takes months to implement and you need a whole team of consultants from a $1,000, $1,500 a day company. It's just people seem to be averse to change management. But if you communicate to them and explain what it is you're doing, you're just trying to mitigate risk. You're not asking techies to do any more than they're currently already doing in their heads, but just write it down so that everybody can see what they've thought through. You're going to get most people on board. You're never going to get everybody on board on day one. But if you can find the right people, have a working group to help you define how it's going to work so that peer pressure can work rather than managers or consultants trying to tell people how to do it. And if you've got those people saying, oh, well, yeah, this is all old-fashioned, we should be going DevOps, which, yeah, maybe you should. But within DevOps, the second way is all about knowing what you're doing and making sure that your peers have reviewed what you're doing. So are we doing anything different? No. We're just recording what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we're going to back it out and get somebody to review that. Just DevOps has a sexier name at the moment than normal operations. So it's just getting people on board and explaining to them what we've got to do. And generally it comes down to lack of communication. Somebody had a bright idea, started forcing it in, and got everybody's backs up. That's generally why these things fail. Making it work, well, it's all about bribery. Have a big box of chocolate fish under your desk and give them out every time somebody does something wrong. Right. And I'm not being facetious there. I will, when going through organisational change, I will quite often buy bags of chocolate fish and give them out to people. Because even the most cynical, worn round the edges DBA who doesn't like talking to people will do anything for another chocolate fish. And it's also about getting the rest of the team to work with you. So Rob England, who's talking tomorrow, the IT skeptic, he came up with a wonderful framework called TIPU that I think I was the only one who ever wanted to adopt because it just seemed to fall into a hole. But it's a great common sense framework. It uses ITIL and COBIT as its core. But fundamentally, it says you don't have to get it right on day one. 80% is good enough. And get the people who are going to be impacted to do the work, because then they've got a vested interest in making sure it works. And that's just common sense. So if you're going to implement change management, find some key people within the different teams in your IT department, which maybe you've got half a dozen different teams, or maybe it's just one team. But find key people that can work with you to understand what do we want to do, what needs to be included, how's it going to work. They'll be the champions for it. They'll then make sure that other people follow it because it's their baby, not somebody else's baby. And they'll be the ones that help drive improvements in it. So it's not rocket surgery. So that's it. Understand what needs to be covered. Record the essential information. Work out what pre-approved changes you can have, or make sure you've got delegated authority for the change manager. Try and automate the approvals as much as you can. Keep it simple and keep improving it. Because if you stop improving it, or stop reviewing it anyway, it'll stagnate. So you don't have to keep changing it, but make sure you keep reviewing it and people know that you're reviewing it. And I think that's it. So are there any questions before I get thrown off?
They'll need some long-range target practice. There must be some questions down the back of the room.
No?
It's not a question, it's something that said you'd have to be a strong person to change that.
Yes. Yeah, Yes, I think that's definitely true. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday because they'd never been involved in change management before. Now they were involved in the approval of changes, and they were loving the fact that they were challenging people to make sure things are being done properly. You can't be the kind of person who just rolls over at any challenge. You've got to be able to fight your corner and know that what you're saying makes sense. So that's a very valid point. Yeah, don't pick your weak person to be a change coordinator. Yep.
I was expecting you to come up and say that you're using ManageEngine and change management to solve these problems, but you didn't really cover that. What do you use for your change management? I guess it is ManageEngine.
So I'm an independent consultant, so I've bit of sales pitch now. I've helped to implement and configure Service Desk Plus and make it work, and I think David's going to go through and help do that next or soon. But I've also used, and I won't name them because it's unfair here, other tools. Some of them are the hundreds of thousands of dollars plus that really make life difficult because you've got to go through everything in a set way. And that works really well for some organisations. You know, universities where you've got different faculties all involved and you want to make sure everybody's doing things the same way, maybe that does work. But for many organisations, it's not quite right. But you can do it with anything. It's just got to be the right size for your organisation more than anything. So work out how you want to do it, and then try and make the tool fit your process. You're never going to get 100% fit. There's going to have to be a bit of give and take between how you want it to work and how the tool will work. So you might have to change your process a bit to fit in with how the tool does things. But you should also be able to say, no, I don't want the tool to do that. It's got to work this way. And if the tool won't work your way completely, maybe it's not the right tool for you. So yes, of course, ManageEngine Service Desk Plus is the best tool for everything. We all know that.
But we're never going to say it.
At least until I've left here tomorrow afternoon. When I go back to working with somebody else's tool. But it shouldn't really make any difference what you're using. Please don't listen to ManageEngine. But you could do it with post-it notes and a big wall where you just write down what you're doing, you stick it on the wall, and you have it like a Kanban board. You could do it that way. Just move them between raised, reviewed, authorized, implemented. But most decent tools work in that way anyway. It just makes it look sexier. Yep.
Do you think it's effective to have a sort of a generic cab that handles all of the change requests, or should there be specialised cabs for different, with subject matter experts from different areas of the business?
Is hate too strong a word? I really don't like separate cabs doing things their own way, because then you start getting different fiefdoms where what if a change is going to impact what that cab looks after as well as what that cab looks after? Do you have to raise two changes? Does it have to go through one cab for approval before it goes to the next cab? There be dragons. It's going to go wrong. Somebody somewhere is going to be upset. So if you've already got that and it's working for you, then it's not my place to say don't do it, but I would probably recommend you bring them together. Maybe you could do it in a sort of federated way, so it's got to go through that cab there before it goes to the federal cab. So you've got state cab, federal cab. But that's going to slow the thing down even more, because if that cab says we need a week's notice and they say we need a week's notice, then that's 2 weeks before it can get anywhere. So making it all one. Now, if you use the tool, you could say it's got to go through these people to get approval before it goes to those people for approval, and that's just a workflow. But yeah, I don't like different teams having authority over different areas. I'm experiencing that with a customer at the moment, and It's not an easy one to change, but I'm sowing the seeds. So they can come up with it as their idea and they'll all think it's wonderful. And I won't get any objection then. I can just go, that's a good idea. Anybody else? No? Cool. Thank you.